The company stood tall in the city, both in glass and in reputation. From the outside, it looked like a place where dreams were built and careers were made. People spoke about it with pride. Families trusted it. Young workers hoped to join it. Newspapers wrote kind words about its growth and success. Inside the building, the walls were clean, the lights were bright, and the halls were always busy. Everything felt fast, important, and confident. The company had grown quickly over the years. What once started as a small idea had become a powerful name. The leaders often talked about values, honesty, and teamwork. These words were written on posters, repeated in meetings, and shared in public speeches. Many employees believed in those words. They worked late hours, skipped breaks, and carried stress home, telling themselves it was all for a good cause. Every morning, people arrived early. Some came with coffee in their hands, others with tired eyes and forced smiles. They greeted each other politely, asking about weekends and families, but rarely going deeper. Everyone had work to do, targets to meet, and deadlines waiting. The pressure was heavy, yet quietly accepted. In this company, hard work was praised, but rest was often ignored. At the center of it all was the idea of success. Charts showed rising numbers. Meetings ended with applause. Emails celebrated achievements. Promotions were announced with excitement. From the outside, it seemed like nothing could go wrong. But inside, not everyone felt the same joy. Some employees noticed small things that felt strange. Instructions changed suddenly. Questions were avoided in meetings. Certain reports were shared with only a few people. When someone asked for clarity, they were told not to worry or to focus on their own tasks. At first, these moments felt unimportant. After all, large companies were complex. Not everything needed explanation, or so it seemed. There was one employee who worked quietly without seeking attention. This person was not powerful, not famous, and not important in the eyes of leadership. Just someone who believed in doing work properly. This employee followed rules, checked details, and cared about fairness. They believed that effort should match reward. Honesty should guide decisions. Day after day, this employee handled routine tasks. Numbers, files, emails, and reports passed through their hands. It was boring work to some, but to this person, accuracy mattered. One small mistake could cause big trouble later. So they stayed careful, even when others rushed. Over time, a pattern began to appear. Some numbers looked too perfect. Growth was steady, almost unreal. Losses seemed to disappear just when they should have appeared. At first, the employee assumed it was due to experience and smart planning. After all, the company was known for strong leadership. But then came a report that didn't match earlier data. It was subtle, just a small difference. Most people would not notice it. But this employee did. They checked again, thinking it might be a personal error. They reread old files, compared dates, and checked sources. The difference remained. A quiet discomfort settled in. The employee tried to ignore it and continued working, yet the feeling stayed. Over the next few days, more small differences appeared. None of them were shocking on their own. But together, they formed a picture that felt wrong. The employee considered asking a supervisor, but past experiences came to mind. Questions were often met with short answers. Curiosity was not always welcomed. People who asked too much were sometimes labeled as difficult or not loyal enough. In this company, loyalty was valued more than doubt, so the employees stayed silent and kept observing. They paid attention in meetings. They listened more carefully to conversations. They noticed how certain topics were quickly changed, how certain departments were never questioned, how certain decisions were rushed through without proper discussion around them. Coworkers were dealing with their own struggles. Some were exhausted. Some felt overlooked. Some were afraid of losing their jobs if they spoke honestly. A culture of quiet acceptance had slowly grown. People focused on survival, not truth. The company often spoke about being a family, but families, at least healthy ones, talk openly. Here, silence was safer. Smiles were expected. Complaints were whispered only during lunch breaks or after work, far from office walls. The employee went home one evening with a heavy mind. The city lights blurred through the bus window. They wondered if they were imagining things. Maybe stress was playing tricks. Maybe the pressure was making them suspicious. It would be easier to forget everything and just do the job, but sleep did not come easily that night. Thoughts kept returning to those numbers, those reports, those avoided questions. Something about them felt unfinished, unresolved. The employee realized that once you see a crack, you cannot unsee it. The next day, the office felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because the employee had changed. They looked at the building with new eyes. The glass walls felt less transparent than before. The friendly greetings felt slightly empty. During a routine task, the employee gained access to older files. These were not commonly used, stored away in digital folders that few visited. While searching for one document, another caught their eye. The title seemed ordinary. Still, something pushed them to open it. Inside were records from years ago. Old decisions, early strategies, and initial reports. As the employee read through them, a slow realization began to form. The company had once faced serious problems, risks that could have ended everything. But those struggles were never spoken about now. More troubling was how those problems had been solved. Some solutions felt rushed. Others felt questionable. Certain choices had short-term benefits, but long-term costs. It looked like the company had chosen appearance over honesty, speed over fairness. The employee felt a tightness in their chest. This was no longer about small mistakes. This was about a pattern, a history, a way of doing things that valued results above all else. Even if it meant bending the truth. They closed the file and sat still for a moment. The office noise continued around them. Phones rang. People laughed. Meetings carried on. No one else seemed to notice the weight now sitting on this one person's shoulders. The employee asked themselves a hard question. If this truth stayed hidden, who would pay the price? Workers? Customers? The public? And if the truth came out, who would suffer first? There was fear, real fear. Not dramatic, not loud, but deep and quiet. Fear of losing stability. Fear of being isolated. Fear of being blamed for problems created long before. The employee understood something important then. The company's perfect image was built layer by layer. And somewhere along the way, truth had been covered, not destroyed, just buried. That day ended like any other. People packed their bags and went home. The building slowly emptied. Lights turned off floor by floor. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. But inside one person's mind, a line had been crossed. What started as small doubt had turned into awareness. And awareness, once born, does not stay quiet for long. The truth was there, hidden, waiting. And whether the company was ready or not, it had already begun to surface. The days that followed were difficult. The employee kept working as usual, but inside a storm was growing. Every task, every report, every meeting carried a quiet tension. What was once simple and routine now felt charged with meaning. Every detail mattered. Every number looked suspicious. The employee began to notice connections between things that once seemed unrelated. It was as if a hidden story was being told in the quiet spaces of files and conversations at first. The employee tried to ignore it. Pretending everything was normal seemed safer. The office continued to buzz with activity. Phones rang, emails were sent, meetings were scheduled, and the world moved forward without pause. Colleagues chatted about weekend plans, new projects, or favorite restaurants. But the employee's mind was elsewhere. It lingered on questions with no easy answers. Then, a subtle opportunity appeared. A new report came in, one that was usually reviewed only by top managers. By chance, the employee had access. Curiosity and caution battled within. Finally, the decision was made to examine it carefully. The employee opened the document and began reading. What appeared on the first page caused a small chill. The numbers were inconsistent with earlier reports. Small, almost invisible errors were scattered throughout. But when pieced together, they told a story that was impossible to ignore. Decisions that had been praised as clever were in fact risky. Profits were overstated. Losses were hidden. Success was carefully crafted, layer by layer, to appear stronger than it really was. The employee reread the report multiple times. Each reading revealed new details. Each inconsistency felt like a warning sign. Something had been wrong for a long time, and nobody outside the leadership seemed to notice. The more the employee explored, the clearer it became. The company's outward perfection was fragile. Very fragile. This realization brought fear. Not the loud kind of fear, but the quiet, deep kind that makes a person feel restless at night. Fear of speaking out. Fear of being blamed. Fear of being isolated or dismissed. The employee knew that uncovering mistakes could shake the foundation of the workplace. Yet the thought of staying silent felt heavier. The truth demanded attention, and ignoring it felt wrong. The employee decided to take notes, recording every unusual finding, every questionable number, every suspicious email or conversation. Each note was written carefully in simple language, without interpretation or accusation. Facts first, assumptions later. The process was exhausting. Time passed slowly, hours slipping by unnoticed. But the employee's determination grew stronger with each discovery. One afternoon, during a routine team meeting, a comment from a senior leader caught the employee's attention. It seemed harmless at first, a simple remark about a project. But when remembered alongside the notes, it gained a new meaning. A small warning sign. A detail that might explain why certain decisions had been made the way they were. The employee felt a mix of dread and curiosity. The pieces were beginning to form a larger puzzle. Outside the office, life continued normally. Commuters rushed through streets. Cafes served coffee. News played on radios and screens. Families laughed and argued. Yet within the employee, the world felt different. Work was no longer just a job. It was a mystery to solve. Every document, every conversation, every email could hold a clue. The ordinary had become extraordinary. The employee found it hard to concentrate. Simple tasks took longer because the mind kept returning to the inconsistencies. At lunch, the usual small talk felt empty. Thoughts raced about the meaning of success, honesty, and loyalty. How far could someone go to protect a company's image? How many lies could be stacked before the truth broke through? Despite the worry, the employee continued performing duties perfectly. Mistakes could not happen now. Accuracy became a shield, a way to protect credibility. This careful approach drew attention from managers, who praised the employee for precision and dedication. Ironically, this recognition gave more access to sensitive information, unintentionally aiding the deeper investigation. Late one evening, the office was quiet. Most employees had left. The glow of desk lamps highlighted files and screens. The employee remained, poring over old emails and financial summaries. Patterns began to emerge. Certain transactions that had once seemed minor were now connected to bigger strategic choices. Emails hinted at hurried decisions, warnings ignored, and risks brushed aside. The company's outward strength was masking internal chaos. The more the employee learned, the more complex the situation seemed. It wasn't simply a case of mistakes or carelessness. It was a system, a culture, that valued results above honesty. Leaders prioritized perception. Reports were tailored. Problems were hidden. The employee realized that the issue went beyond numbers and decisions. It touched values, ethics, and trust. A part of the employee wanted to speak out immediately. Another part urged caution. The stakes were high. If the information reached the wrong ears, the employee could lose everything. But doing nothing meant living with a secret that could hurt many people. Every night, the employee replayed scenarios in their mind, weighing risks and consequences. Sleep became rare. Restless thoughts followed even during the simplest daily activities. As days turned into weeks, small signs appeared that the leadership might sense something was amiss. Meetings grew slightly more guarded. Questions that were once answered freely were now brushed aside. Decisions were discussed behind closed doors. The employee noticed these changes but kept focus. Observation, without alerting anyone, became a careful skill. During one quiet afternoon, the employee stumbled upon a conversation between two managers. Their words were subtle, their tones cautious. They spoke of covering mistakes and protecting appearances. While neither spoke openly of wrongdoing, the implications were clear. The employee felt a mix of shock and validation. What had been suspected was now being confirmed, piece by piece. Even as tension grew, the employee tried to maintain normalcy. Tasks were completed on time. Emails were polite and professional. Colleagues remained unaware of the storm brewing behind one person's attention. Sometimes it felt lonely. The weight of the secret was heavy. No one to share it with. No one to guide or advise. One night, sitting in the nearly empty office, the employee reflected. The discovery was more than numbers or reports. It was about the heart of the company. The choices leaders made, the culture that had developed, the quiet compromises that built an illusion of success. The employee realized that the truth was more dangerous than imagined, but also more necessary than ever. By now, the employee had compiled a growing record of evidence. Each document, each note, each observation was organized and labeled carefully, not for personal gain, not for revenge, but for clarity. If the time came to reveal what was happening, the facts had to speak louder than opinion. The company from the outside remained as perfect as ever. Visitors praised its professionalism. Employees smiled in public. News stories continued to highlight achievements. Yet inside, one person had begun seeing the fractures that no one else noticed. The perfect image was a mask, a carefully crafted illusion. And behind the mask, truth waited quietly, ready to be uncovered. The employee knew the next step was risky. The curiosity, the sense of justice, and the desire to protect others pushed forward. But caution whispered that one wrong move could change everything. Balancing these feelings became a daily struggle. One could not act hastily, yet inaction felt like betrayal, night after night. The employee stayed late, reviewing, thinking, planning. Every small detail mattered. A misread email could ruin months of careful observation. Every small choice could affect outcomes in ways that were hard to predict. Patience became a weapon, careful attention, a shield. Through it all, the employee learned more than just facts about numbers and reports. They learned about human nature, the complexity of leadership, and the hidden costs of ambition. They saw how people could be loyal to appearances, how fear shaped behavior, and how courage sometimes grew quietly. Unnoticed by the end of this period, one thing was clear. The discovery could no longer be ignored. It had grown too significant. The employee knew that eventually a decision would have to be made. Speak out, confront the risk, and reveal the hidden truths, or continue the quiet work. Living with knowledge that could change everything, the employee looked around the office one last time that evening. Empty chairs, silent corridors, and dim lights reflected a calm that was only surface deep. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the silent tension in one office building. Inside, the employee felt a sense of responsibility heavier than ever before. The truth was not yet revealed, but it had already begun to change the way one person saw the company, the people, and the future. And so, the stage was set. The discovery had been made. The evidence was growing. The quiet tension built like a shadow behind every report, every meeting, every decision. The company's perfect image remained, but cracks were forming. No one had yet realized how deep those cracks went. The tension inside the employee grew with each passing day. Working silently while knowing the cracks in the company's foundation felt heavier than any physical burden. Each morning, the same routine continued, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every document, every email, every conversation carried a hidden weight. The employee knew that any careless glance or missed detail could hide or reveal something important. They had become a quiet observer in a world that continued as nothing was wrong. The employee found themselves watching people more closely than ever. Colleagues laughed at jokes, argued over projects, and complained about deadlines, unaware that someone among them held a deeper understanding of the truth. Small habits, repeated phrases, and unspoken tensions now had new meaning. Each tiny clue built a larger picture, and the employee could feel The hidden structure of the company shifting slowly beneath the surface, it was not easy to maintain a balance. Outwardly, the employee had to act normal, cheerful, efficient. Inside, a storm of thoughts swirled constantly. Who could be trusted? Who might notice a sudden interest in old files or unusual attention to detail? Fear and curiosity battled daily. Silence had become both a weapon and a prison. Speaking too soon could ruin everything. Waiting too long could mean that the problem grew worse, harder to correct. Then one day, an unexpected opportunity arrived. A senior manager asked the employee to assist on a confidential project, one that involved reviewing past transactions and comparing them to recent reports. At first, the employee hesitated, aware that the project could reveal even more sensitive information. But the chance to examine these records carefully was too important to ignore. The employee accepted the task, aware that every document could be a clue. Every number could tell a story. As the employee reviewed the files, more patterns became visible. Some decisions that had been praised as clever were now shown as short-term fixes, hiding larger problems. Certain risks had been taken without proper documentation. Warnings from years ago had been ignored or buried. The picture that emerged was no longer about minor errors. It was about a system that valued appearance over honesty, speed over thoroughness, and immediate gain over long-term stability. The employee felt the familiar tightness in their chest. This knowledge was both a burden and a responsibility. They thought about coworkers, customers, and even families affected by the company's decisions. Every choice made by the leadership had consequences that were invisible to most, yet visible to someone willing to look closely. The employee realized that truth, once discovered, cannot be unseen, cannot be ignored, and cannot easily be contained. Fear remained a constant companion. Speaking out could lead to being dismissed, disbelieved, or blamed. Yet staying silent felt like participating in deception. Each evening, the employee replayed scenarios in their mind. Conversations, actions, and decisions were examined from every angle. What could happen if the truth came out? Who would be affected first? How could the evidence be presented without causing chaos unnecessarily? While navigating these inner conflicts, the employee also continued with ordinary work. Meetings, reports, deadlines, they all required focus. Precision and professionalism became shields. The employee had to be perfect outwardly to maintain credibility inwardly. Ironically, this dedication earned recognition. Supervisors praised reliability and attention to detail, giving the employee even more access to sensitive records and information. Late nights became routine. While the office emptied floor by floor, the employee remained, sifting through files, emails, and old project notes. A story was emerging, quietly and inexorably, about decisions made, warnings ignored, and consequences avoided or postponed. The company's outward strength and image seemed increasingly fragile compared to what lay hidden behind the polished walls. One evening, while examining a series of financial summaries, a discovery struck the employee. A set of transactions appeared unusually timed, coinciding with reports that were publicly praised. Certain losses were minimized or delayed, giving the impression of continuous growth. The strategy seemed clever, almost brilliant. But in reality, it was a gamble, a risky way to manipulate perception while ignoring underlying problems. The employee realized that the stakes were far higher than ever imagined. The sense of isolation deepened. While coworkers discussed promotions, vacations, or office gossip, the employee carried the weight of this knowledge alone. Conversations had to remain surfacely. Curiosity had to be hidden. Questions had to be calculated. Any slip could reveal an awareness that was dangerous in a culture valuing compliance and appearances. At home, sleep became fragmented. Thoughts returned again and again to the files, the emails, and the meetings. Restless hours were spent considering outcomes, risks, and consequences. The employee wondered how much of leadership's public message was truth and how much was carefully constructed illusion. The more they thought, the more the answers seemed both shocking and inevitable. The employee also observed subtle changes in leadership behavior. Meetings became slightly more guarded. Certain topics were avoided or rushed. Conversations behind closed doors were longer, more cautious. Something in the air hinted that the cracks the employee had discovered were not completely invisible to others. The quiet tension in the office was increasing, though most employees remained unaware of the deeper issues. In one instance, the employee overheard a conversation between two executives. Words were chosen carefully, tones measured. They spoke of managing appearances and protecting reputation while avoiding direct mention of the actual problems. The employee felt a mixture of shock and confirmation. What had been suspected was now partially acknowledged, hidden in language and euphemism, but undeniable to someone paying attention. Despite this, the employee continued to act normally. Outwardly, there was efficiency, politeness, and professionalism. Inwardly, the analysis, observation, and planning continued. Even minor errors in record-keeping could have consequences in revealing or hiding the truth. Patience and meticulous attention became critical tools. With each new finding, the employee's sense of responsibility grew. This was no longer about personal curiosity or workplace intrigue. It was about understanding the company fully, recognizing the consequences of decisions, and preparing for the day when truth might need to be revealed. Each note, each document, each observation was carefully stored, ready to be used if necessary. The company, outwardly flawless, continued to operate. Visitors marveled at the professionalism. Employees smiled and greeted each other. News outlets praised achievements. Yet inside, one person understood that the perfection was fragile. A single revelation could change everything. Employee realized that watching, recording, and preparing were now as important as any work task. Evenings became a time for reflection. Walking through empty halls, the employee thought about the human cost of silence and deception. How many decisions had been made for appearance's sake rather than long-term welfare? How many employees, customers, and stakeholders would unknowingly carry the consequences? The weight of these questions pressed heavily, but clarity was growing. The employee also began to consider strategies. If the truth were revealed, how could it be done responsibly? Evidence was necessary to support claims without causing unnecessary panic. How could credibility be maintained? These questions required careful planning, careful observation, and precise timing. The stakes were immense. But the employee understood that ignoring the truth was no longer an option. Gradually, a resolve developed. Courage and caution had to coexist. Patience and action had to balance. While fear remained, the employee recognized that the role they had assumed, quiet observer, recorder of facts, protector of truth, was necessary. They were no longer just completing tasks. They were safeguarding the integrity of the company in a way few could understand. The tension built like a hidden current. While the office seemed normal to outsiders, every moment carried potential for discovery or mistake. Every decision, every observation, and every conversation was now meaningful. The employee felt both the burden and the responsibility of knowing what most could not see. By the end of this period, the employee had compiled a comprehensive understanding of the patterns, risks, and inconsistencies within the company. The evidence was strong, the observations clear, and the potential consequences understood. The truth was growing closer to revelation. The employee knew that the next steps would be critical, dangerous, and transformative. But for now, observation. Continued preparation was meticulous, and patience remained the most important tool. The stage was set for decisions that would test courage, integrity, and loyalty. The company's outward perfection remained intact, yet within one careful, determined observer. Understanding had reached a point where silence was no longer sustainable. The employee now carried not only knowledge, but the responsibility to act when the moment arrived. And in that quiet tension, the company's hidden truth waited, patient, inevitable, and ready to be faced. The tension inside the company was growing, though most employees remained unaware. For the employee who had been quietly observing, every day now felt like walking a tightrope. The knowledge they carried was heavier than ever. Every interaction, every meeting, and every decision could become a clue to what had been hidden for years. The employee knew that sooner or later, something would have to be done. But the timing and method were uncertain, and mistakes could be costly. One morning, a meeting was called unexpectedly. The senior management team gathered in a glass-walled room, an unusual choice that drew attention. The employee attended, sitting quietly at the edge. Leaders spoke with unusual seriousness, discussing recent challenges, ongoing projects, and the need for transparency. While their words were careful and measured, the employee noticed small tells, subtle hesitations, carefully chosen phrases, and glances exchanged between executives that hinted at underlying stress. After the meeting, the employee returned to their desk, reviewing old documents and notes again. Something had shifted. The leadership was behaving differently, even if publicly nothing had changed. Perhaps rumors, small errors, or external pressures had begun to penetrate the carefully constructed image. The employee realized that the moment of truth was approaching, even if no one else realized it yet. The employee decided to focus on cross-checking information. Each file, report, and email was analyzed in detail. Connections between past decisions and current practices became clearer. Some executives had deliberately concealed problems, while others had unknowingly supported flawed choices. The employee began to map these patterns, carefully noting dates, names, and decisions. Every observation became a thread in a larger tapestry of the company's hidden reality. It was during one of these late-night sessions that a breakthrough occurred. The employee found a set of documents that clearly showed deliberate actions to manipulate reports. The evidence was undeniable. Losses had been hidden, risks had been misrepresented, and certain decisions were made purely to maintain appearances. The implications were enormous. The company's success was built on layers of selective truth. The employee felt a mix of shock and determination. This was no longer a question of curiosity. It was a matter of integrity. For the first time, the employee considered the consequences of exposing the truth. Speaking out could topple careers, disrupt projects, and shake confidence. But remaining silent meant allowing the company to continue a fragile path, potentially endangering employees, clients, and the organization itself. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily. Every possible scenario was considered. Every potential outcome was analyzed, both for immediate impact and long-term consequences. Despite the stress, the employee continued normal work during the day. Outwardly, everything appeared routine. Emails were answered, reports were completed, and colleagues engaged in ordinary conversations. But the employee's mind never rested. Every smile, every meeting, every casual remark carried hidden meaning. Even casual mistakes or anomalies were now scrutinized. Adding to the growing picture of the company's hidden struggles, as the weeks passed, the employee realized that others might also be aware of something amiss. Subtle signs indicated growing unease among certain managers. Conversations had an edge, emails were more guarded, and some departments were unusually quiet. The employee remained cautious, observing without revealing knowledge. Patience was critical. Any misstep could alert leadership prematurely, lead to defensive actions rather than solutions. The employee also began to think strategically. If the truth had to be revealed, it could not be done in a way that caused chaos. Facts needed to be documented carefully. Evidence needed to be organized logically. The impact on employees, clients, and public perception had to be considered. Every note, every observation, every document became part of a careful plan. The employee understood that preparation was as important as courage. One afternoon, while reviewing correspondence between executives, the employee discovered an email chain that confirmed deliberate concealment of losses and mismanagement. The language was subtle, but the intent was clear. The employee felt a mixture of vindication and urgency. The pattern of deception was no longer theory. It was documented fact. This evidence could not be ignored. The company's public success was built on hidden truths. These truths were now undeniable. The employee spent long hours considering next steps. How could the truth be revealed responsibly? Who needed to know first? How could harm be minimized while ensuring accountability? These questions were challenging, requiring careful thought, foresight, and courage. The employee understood that action was inevitable, but timing and method were crucial. During this time, the company continued its normal operations outwardly. Projects moved forward, clients were served, and daily routines appeared unchanged. To the casual observer, there was no problem. Yet beneath the surface, tensions were rising. Leadership was more cautious, employees were more alert, and the environment was subtly charged with anticipation. The stage was set for change, though no one yet knew how or when it would arrive. The employee also considered the human side of the situation. How would colleagues react? How would clients respond? How could the company survive the exposure of its hidden problems? The questions were complex, touching on ethics, loyalty, and responsibility. The employee realized that truth had consequences beyond immediate numbers. It affected people, trust, and the organization's very identity. Despite the pressure, the employee remained meticulous in documenting findings. Every document, email, and decision was noted carefully. Patterns were highlighted, connections were mapped, and potential questions were anticipated. Preparation became both a shield and a weapon. The employee knew that when the truth was finally revealed, credibility would be essential. Facts had to speak louder than opinions or emotions. One evening, as the office emptied, the employee reflected on the journey so far. The discovery had begun with small inconsistencies, but it had grown into a comprehensive understanding of the company's inner workings. The employee had learned more than facts. They had learned about leadership, ethics, human nature, and the hidden costs of ambition. The responsibility of holding this knowledge was heavy, but clarity had emerged from confusion. In the days that followed, subtle changes occurred. Leaders were more careful in meetings, cautious in emails, and protective of their image. The employee noticed these shifts, but remained patient. Observing, documenting, and preparing continued. The company's outward perfection was still intact, but the employee knew that cracks were widening. The moment of revelation was approaching, and every decision made now would influence what came next. The employee also considered personal risks. Speaking out could mean losing a career, reputation, or stability. Remaining silent could mean complicity in deception. Both paths carried weight. The employee understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Preparation, observation, integrity became guiding principles. Late nights were spent reviewing patterns, comparing documents, and planning strategies. The employee's understanding of the company was now detailed and comprehensive. Every major decision, every hidden risk, every attempt to conceal problems was documented. The employee knew that the truth could no longer be ignored, and when revealed, it could change everything. Through this process, the employee also observed the reactions of others to subtle changes. Some managers were uneasy, some employees more cautious. A quiet tension filled the air. The company's carefully constructed image was beginning to strain under hidden pressures. The employee realized that revelation was inevitable. The question was when, not if. As concluded, the employee understood the stakes. The company's success, the trust of employees, clients, and the public, and the integrity of leadership were all at risk. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The truth was ready to be faced. The employee, carrying both knowledge and responsibility, prepared for the moment when observation would turn into action and hidden realities would finally meet the light. The company, outwardly unchanged, stood on the brink of a transformation that could alter its future forever. The day had finally arrived when the hidden truths could no longer remain concealed. The employee had spent months observing, documenting, and analyzing, preparing for the inevitable moment when the truth would meet reality. Each document, each email, each note had been reviewed, and a clear picture of the company's hidden struggles had emerged. Now, the time to act had come. The atmosphere in the office was tense, though most employees were unaware of the deeper stakes. Leaders moved cautiously, aware that something was about to shift. The employee, quiet and observant as always, carried the weight of the evidence in their mind. Every step, every conversation, and every decision now had the potential to trigger a chain reaction that could change everything. It began with a meeting scheduled by top management, a meeting that would include key decision-makers and department heads. The employee entered the room with a mixture of fear and determination. The air was heavy with expectation, though no one else yet understood the full weight of what was about to be discussed. The employee had prepared meticulously, ready to present facts clearly, logically, and without exaggeration. As the meeting progressed, the employee spoke carefully, outlining discrepancies, patterns, and hidden risks. Charts and documents were displayed, showing clear evidence of past mistakes, mismanagement, and deliberate concealment. The room, once full of casual conversation and routine discussions, fell silent. Eyes widened, hands tightened around papers, and murmurs of disbelief passed quietly between colleagues. For some, the revelations were shocking. They had believed in the company's perfect image, trusted its leadership, and felt secure in their roles. The employee's clear, methodical presentation broke through the illusion, revealing a reality that had been carefully hidden. The weight of the truth pressed on everyone in the room, creating a moment of shared realization that could not be ignored. Leaders responded with a mixture of emotions. Some were defensive, struggling to reconcile the exposure with their own decisions. Others were reflective, realizing that past choices had consequences they had underestimated. The employee remained calm, presenting facts without accusation, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Every question was answered with precision, every concern addressed methodically, till the pattern became undeniable. The company faced a turning point. Decisions that had been hidden were now out in the open. Losses, risks, and past mistakes could no longer be brushed aside. The truth, once hidden, had been revealed. The employee's careful preparation had made the disclosure credible, compelling, and impossible to dismiss. It was clear that the company's image of perfection had been built on a foundation that needed urgent attention. Outside the meeting room, employees sensed a subtle shift. Conversations became quieter, more cautious. Managers moved with deliberate care. The company's usual rhythm continued, but an undercurrent of change had begun. The revelation of hidden truths had created both uncertainty and an opportunity for growth. The employee, having navigated months of observation and preparation, understood that the coming days would be critical in shaping the company's future. Following the initial disclosure, a series of internal reviews and investigations were initiated. Departments examined records, analyzed processes, and revisited decisions. The company's systems, once opaque, became transparent. Accountability became the focus, not blame. The employee's evidence served as a roadmap, guiding leaders through the process of understanding past missteps and implementing corrective measures. Change was difficult. Some leaders chose to step down, acknowledging their role in past decisions. Others committed to rebuilding processes, improving transparency, and prioritizing honesty over appearance. The employee observed these developments, understanding that transformation required both courage and humility. The company, shaken but resilient, began to rebuild trust from the inside out. Employees, initially shocked, gradually adjusted to the new reality. Training sessions, open discussions, and transparent communications became common. The culture of silence and fear slowly gave way to one of honesty, accountability, and shared responsibility. The employee witnessed a shift in attitudes from cautious compliance to active engagement. People began to feel empowered, knowing that their work contributed to genuine success rather than maintaining an illusion. Clients, stakeholders were informed carefully. With a focus on transparency and accountability, the company's reputation, once threatened by hidden truths, began to recover as honesty became the guiding principle. The employee recognized the importance of clear communication, understanding that rebuilding trust required openness and integrity at every level. The process was slow, but it was genuine and sustainable. Throughout this period, the employee remained an observer and guide, offering insights, clarifications, and factual information. Their role shifted from silent investigator to trusted advisor. The months of careful observation, documentation, and preparation had positioned them to help the company navigate a critical turning point. Their dedication and integrity became a model for others, showing the value of courage, patience, and attention to detail. As weeks turned into months, the company began to stabilize. Systems were improved, policies were rewritten, and processes became more transparent. Mistakes were acknowledged, lessons were learned, and accountability was enforced. The company's growth, once driven by selective truth, was now grounded in real performance, integrity, and trust. The employee reflected on the journey. What had begun as quiet observation, careful documentation, and internal conflict had culminated in meaningful change. The weight of knowledge, once a heavy burden, had been transformed into action that benefited the company, its employees, and stakeholders. Courage and responsibility had turned awareness into meaningful impact. The transformation was not easy. Challenges remained, and the effects of past decisions lingered. Yet the company had learned an invaluable lesson, that truth, no matter how difficult, must guide action. Transparency and accountability, once ignored, became central to the organization's identity. The employees' dedication, persistence, and integrity had made this possible. In the end, the company emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Employees felt a renewed sense of purpose. Leadership embraced humility and transparency. Clients and stakeholders trusted the organization more deeply. The employee, having navigated the delicate balance between observation, responsibility, and action, had played a pivotal role in reshaping the company's future. The story of the company, once shrouded in hidden truths, became a lesson in integrity, courage, and the power of one individual's dedication to honesty. The perfect image of the past had been replaced by a reality grounded in truth. And in that reality, the company found not only accountability, but also genuine strength, resilience, and a foundation for long-term success. The journey was complete, yet its impact would continue. The company would never forget the lessons learned. Employees would carry forward the values of transparency and responsibility. Leadership would remember the importance of integrity over appearances. And the employee, whose careful observation and courageous action had revealed the truth, would remain a quiet example of how one person's dedication to honesty can change an entire organization forever, even after the company had begun to recover. The impact of the revelations continued to unfold. Employees were adjusting to a new environment, one where honesty and transparency were expected. The culture had shifted, but old habits and fears did not disappear overnight. The employee who had first discovered the hidden truths now observed how the organization adapted to this transformed reality. One morning, the employee noticed subtle signs of change in departments that had been previously quiet and reserved. Teams that once hesitated to share ideas now engaged in open discussions. Meetings became collaborative rather than hierarchical. Employees felt more comfortable asking questions and pointing out inconsistencies. Knowing that transparency was valued over appearances, the employee understood that this shift was a slow but vital process, requiring patience and consistent reinforcement. The leadership team also continued to evolve. Executives who had once prioritized perception over truth were now more reflective and accountable. They initiated regular sessions to discuss challenges openly, encouraged feedback, and admitted mistakes when they occurred. The employee noted that humility had become a new form of strength. Leaders were learning that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned through actions, consistency, and openness. The company faced lingering challenges. Clients who had been unaware of internal problems expressed concerns and requested detailed explanations. The employee observed leaders handling these discussions with honesty, providing clear answers and showing a commitment to improvement. The process was difficult, requiring careful communication and reassurance. But it ultimately strengthened relationships rather than weakening them internally. Employees were still processing the events that had shaken the organization. Some were inspired by the courage it took to reveal the hidden truths. Others struggled with lingering distrust and skepticism. The employee, once an observer and investigator, now took on a mentoring role, guiding colleagues through changes and helping them understand the importance of integrity in every decision. During this period, the company implemented new policies to prevent similar issues in the future. Documentation became more thorough, decision-making processes more transparent, and reporting systems more accountable. Employees were trained to recognize and address potential problems proactively. The employee watched as these measures slowly became part of the company's routine, creating a culture where honesty and careful observation were valued at every level. The employee also reflected on personal growth. The journey from discovery to action had been challenging, filled with fear, doubt, and moral dilemmas. Yet it had taught valuable lessons about responsibility, patience, and courage. The employee realized that truth often required endurance, careful planning, and the willingness to confront discomfort. These insights were not only applicable in the workplace, but also in understanding human nature and the consequences of choices. One day, a team meeting revealed further unexpected challenges. A project that had been assumed safe now faced scrutiny due to previous mismanagement. The employee assisted in reviewing records and identifying areas needing correction. Their methodical approach ensured that mistakes were addressed systematically rather than ignored. Colleagues began to rely on the employee's guidance, recognizing the value of careful observation and integrity. As the company moved forward, there was a growing sense of shared purpose. Employees began to see their work as contributing to genuine success rather than maintaining an image. The culture of fear and secrecy was replaced by one of accountability and collaboration. The employee noted that, while perfection was impossible, honesty and transparency provided a solid foundation for sustainable growth. The company also took steps to acknowledge past mistakes publicly. Sharing lessons learned with clients and stakeholders, transparency and communication became a hallmark of the organization. The employee observed that this approach, while initially challenging, reinforced credibility and trust. The company had transformed not just internally, but also in how it was perceived externally. The employee continued to monitor progress, documenting improvements and identifying areas where old habits might reemerge. Patience remained essential. Change required consistent reinforcement and a commitment from every level of the organization. Small setbacks were inevitable, but the employee focused on the overall trajectory rather than isolated incidents. In one particular instance, a junior employee discovered an inconsistency in a report that echoed past mistakes. Instead of ignoring it, they reported it immediately following the new protocols. The employee saw this as a success, evidence that the culture of transparency had taken root. The organization was no longer reliant on one person's vigilance. Honesty and accountability were becoming shared values.